Good morning, good afternoon, good wherever you're at. My name is Ryan MacArthur. I'm the co founder of Nari, a platform that helps people identify the types of roles they want to target, helps them craft that messaging, and then provides the community and support to execute and find that next opportunity. I've been a career coach and a resume writer for about 12 years. Been training people on how to conduct themselves during interviews and navigate different types along the way, whether that be somebody coming fresh out of university or even at the C suite level. And what that's going to come down to essentially is storytelling 101. How can we communicate our value in a way that's engaging, that's conversational, and informative? Um, and what's going to follow throughout this webinar today, it's going to be a set of techniques and methodologies that I've taught folks for years. I wish I could sit here and say these are my own proprietary ways of doing things, but one of my mentors who taught me how to coach football, soccer, told me, look, good artists borrow, great artists steal. So we find the best things that work, we put them together, we package them, and try to put them in front of folks like yourselves in a way that's going to help you get to your next role. So, a few housekeeping things as well. Very happy to share slides at any time. Just drop me a message on LinkedIn and we can get you that. There'll also be recordings as well on the Nari platform. You can reach that by wearenari.com. Additionally, as well, if you have questions that maybe you want to take offline related to an interview you might have coming up or a question that maybe you've just struggled with when it's been put in front of you, again, feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. Very happy to answer that. But at the same time, if anybody wants to drop one in the comment section, you're more than welcome to. We'll answer it live. We'll work through it together. And then one last thing, what this session is not, this isn't about handing you a script. One of the most common pieces of feedback that I get from my network of recruiters, hiring managers, and whatnot these days is that authenticity matters. And if it feels like, we're a bit too robotic or it's too structured in the way we deliver these things, and it doesn't sound like, how we would say these things to a person who's sitting in front of us, if we were at a cafe or a park just sharing stories about our jobs, it can be a turnoff. So what we're trying to find the best way to do is demonstrate your value, tell your stories, and do it in a conversational and engaging way. Right. So today's agenda, we're going to talk through kind of the basics of what we need to know the minute we walk in that door. Something to keep in mind, most people make up their interviews within the first 90 seconds of that interview starting. So that first impression is critical, whether that's online or whether that's in person. A lot of that's going to come down to body language, how we present ourselves, how we get the conversation on the right foot. We're going to talk about communicating your value, ways that we can demonstrate cause and effect, right? Oftentimes people just focus on theory. This is what I know how to do. This is what I have done. The hiring manager really only cares about how you're going to make their lives easier. So through our stories, we want to demonstrate, hey, I've solved these problems for you here. I can do them for you here. And here's the evidence to back that up. We're going to talk about interview preparation. The most common thing I say to people when it comes to this, there's no penalty for preparation. So if that means having your resume in front of you during the interview, if that means having some notes in hand, just making sure that you are focused on delivering that information instead of worrying about, oh, I can't remember this and I'm not sure if I said that right. We want it to flow. We want it to feel natural. And then we're going to talk about some of the questions that you should be asking, what you should be looking for throughout that interview, because people often forget interviews are a two-way street. You are learning as much about the company and the people you be working with as they are you. So having some questions on hand where we can understand, okay, what's the culture like in this organization, or how is success going to be measured, or what am I walking into here? It's going to allow you to make much more actionable decisions as you navigate the interview process. And then last few minutes will just be some open Q&A. I'm happy to answer any questions that come through. Again, if you'd rather not put them in the chat, you can drop them to me in a private message on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to go through it. Or if you don't want me to, just let me know and we'll leave it at that. But yeah, diving on into it. So the first thing that I challenge people to do when it comes to thinking about interviews is I don't want this to feel like an interrogation. This is not you sitting down in front of somebody and it's just question, answer, question, answer. That's very awkward. That's very stilted. It's uncomfortable in a certain way. You're not going to be as relaxed as you would be. That person's probably going to feel a little icky about it as well, for lack of a better phrase. So instead of thinking about this as like, oh, this is a test or an exam that I either pass or fail, we need to look at it more as, oh, this is just a chat with two people deciding on a fit, right? And oftentimes this can come down to how we deliver, because a lot of the people that I coach and work with when it comes to interviews, they have great stories. Plenty of cause and effect, plenty of examples of how they're going to make that company better. But they struggle with the delivery. And here's what I mean. When we get nervous and we get stiff, sometimes our shoulders come up and we speak very quickly and we speak at the same monotone space and we never change the rhythm of how we speak. It's very easy to tune out to somebody who speaks at the same speed, at the same tone. That's not how we talk to people. That's not how we communicate with our friends, our family, people around us. So think about it. When I'm talking to my friends, sometimes my voice comes up. Sometimes I drop it down. Sometimes I'm going to go a little fast. And then I'm going to make it a little bit slower. I'm going to pause. Let my brain catch up with my mouth and then go through. Because the core element that we want to get to is, oh, I'm talking to somebody familiar. And if we communicate the same way that we talk to our friends and family, that person that you're interviewing with is going to start to think, oh, this person's familiar, and that usually do it subconsciously. They're much more likely to engage with you. They're much more likely to listen to you. They're much more likely to like you. And as much as it pains me to say it, interviews are popularity contests. Who do I want to work with the most? So we have to get you in that position where you're at the top of the list. Important things to think about as well is that, every interaction can be an interview. When we talk job search strategy, my focus is more on conversations as opposed to job applications. You can spend 5 minutes on LinkedIn and find no shortage of posts about, oh, I've sent out 500, 600, 700 applications this last month. I haven't heard anything back. That's just trying to cast a wide net and trying to you're trying to buy a lottery ticket, so to speak, because applications are binary. You get the interview or you don't. A conversation can go many different places. I might be planting seeds that I cultivate later down the road. I might have a conversation with a potential hiring manager. Hey, I'm not the right fit for this company, but our sister company or strategic partner would definitely want to talk to you. Let me get you in touch. Conversations have many variables. Applications can only go two ways, right? So the more we can focus on conversations, whether it's in our job search strategy or interviews, typically we get much better results there. Goes back to what I said before. Authenticity is key. That's what we're looking for. Think about from a standpoint of when you do go into these conversations. And again, we'll talk more about this at the later half of the webinar, but making sure that you have questions to ask. So it's not just a one-way street. You're finding out information, but also as well, you're showing interest. Some of the overwhelming feedback, again, I get from my network of recruiters, hiring managers, they're not looking for somebody who just wants any old job. They're looking for somebody who wants the job. And the only way we can figure out if it's the job is if we ask questions. We're insightful, we're engaging, we're curious. It doesn't mean you just bombard the person with questions throughout the entire interview. However, that means we've got a few in our back pocket ready to go as and when it's appropriate to ask. And that's just going to come through general parts of the conversation, right? If somebody asks you what's your greatest failure, and then you just come back and say, hey, what's the culture like here? That's a bit off. We have to find those organic ways to slip those in. When we talk about understanding our strengths, right, we have to know, okay, what are my market differentiators? What are the things that set me apart from the competition? What makes me unique? What's my special sauce, that X factor? Because then we can start to figure out ways to bake them into our stories, whether that be the tell me about yourself question that opens things up, or throughout the stories we tell about situational or behavioral questions that come up. So best place to start is the resume. Look at those accomplishments, the cause and effect. I did this, which resulted in that. Or here's my result. Here's how I got there. And we can flesh out the story a bit more. Because typically, we want an interview response, a typical one, to come in at around 90 seconds to 2 minutes-ish. We can push to 3, we can drop it down to a minute. Anything more can really start going over the head of the person you're speaking to. I mean, if you've ever been at a party and somebody just cornered you and just ranted and rambled and talked for 10 minutes straight, I don't even remember what the first thing they said was. Or again, it goes back to conversation. I say something, you say something, we find common ground, we have a laugh. There's a natural flow to it. It's social engineering. That person's now going to like you more. They're going to listen more. They're going to be more curious about you. People often come to me and say, oh, I don't have any achievements. I just do my job. I clock in, I clock out, and I say bullcrap to that. They usually use the other word. Reason being is that if somebody's paying you to do a job, you are accomplishing something. You are delivering some type of value to that organization. You might just not know how to communicate it. So things that we can pull this from, it can be obviously, okay, I took a number from here and got it to there, whether that be increasing sales, whether that be decreasing costs, whether that be supporting or working with a certain amount of offices, scope and scale. People love getting numbers in these things. And I'll say it, quantifiable data is great, because the reader, the listener, the person you're speaking to does not need a lot of context to understand a number went from here to there. But the qualitative aspects of what we do in our job can be just as impactful. So for example, if you're somebody who coaches, mentors, trains junior professionals, there really is a lot of value behind that. When we keep talent in-house, when we build cultures and environments that make people want to stick around, there's real value behind that. Because ask anybody who has had to go through the hiring process in any way, shape, or form. It's expensive, it's time consuming, it's stressful. So if you're doing things that make that not the case and we don't have to worry about it, worth talking about. And that's just one example of a qualitative achievement. And there's many more. And if you're not sure about yours, again, drop us a message. Better yet, come into Nari's open office hours. I'm having some tomorrow. Basically how that works is a couple times during the week, I just open up a Google Meet. We send out a link to all of our users, and it's, hey, if you've got any questions you want to drop in, feel free. It can be one question, it can be a lot, just depends on how many people come in. But that's one of the core offerings we have through Nari, is that, hey, you want to talk to a career coach, you got one on hand, and you don't pay extra for that. That's just a part of the service. If you're still unsure about things to talk about related to your value, what you bring to the table, talk to your network. Talk to the people who know you, friends, family, coworkers. And it's a bit cringe or cheesy to ask, but it's worth asking. What do you think I'm good at? What's the value that you think I deliver in the role? Having that outside perspective can be extremely valuable. I've literally built a business around being that outside perspective on someone's career. And you would be surprised what people can see when they're not in the driver's seat, so to speak. They have much more of a sometimes holistic view of what you did, as opposed to what you're doing personally, where it can feel very siloed and you're just focused on the job. They can see the impacts and the outcomes that ripple out through the rest of the organization. Performance reviews are always a safe bet as well. Even if you're looking to mine achievements for your resume, LinkedIn, things like that. Awards, accolades are great to talk about. They just need a little context sometimes. Like, for example, if I said, well, I won the President's Club 3 times in a row. If you're in sales, you probably know, hey, Ryan hit his quota every year. He probably go on a really nice trip. He's good at what he does. Somebody's outside sales, they wouldn't know that. So providing a little bit of context, especially if you're interviewing for a role that's going to be a job change, career change, something outside of your normal world you play in, not a bad idea to add just that little bit of extra context there. And then the last thing I like to challenge people on is saying, like, what do people come to you and ask for help with? And it's okay if you can't think of any examples, but oftentimes people can. And that can be a great opportunity to talk about the mentor coaching training, serving as that trusted business partner, providing value. That's the key we're trying to get at, providing value. So the opening to almost any interview, it's going to be some form of, hey, tell us about yourself. Please introduce yourself. And the trap that a lot of people fall into is they give a history lesson as opposed to a story. They say, well, I was born here and I went to school there and I got my first job and blah, 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 blah. Probably the same stuff everybody else has said. And you're interviewing 5, 6 people in a day, or maybe 7 or 8 throughout a week. It can all start to blend together, those same answers, those same responses. So there's 2 approaches I recommend taking when it comes to that opening question. The first one is to tell a story that shares something personal about yourself, but also demonstrates the value that you're going to deliver as a professional. So for example, if I was using myself in a very truncated way, I might say, well, before I started my businesses, I played and coached soccer for a living. And that's what got me into this space. I would see a lot of my friends get to the end of their careers and not really know what to do, what was next. So as I was winding things down on the pitch, I started to build my practice, and here I am today. So hopefully from that, you can start to pull a few things. So, okay, this person plays sport at a high level. He's probably very disciplined, competitive, works well within a team. He might speak different languages because he played abroad, and he would know to say football instead of soccer to a British person he's interviewing with, right? The point is that we find some common ground, right? Maybe we have a shared experience. Maybe, we find that way to connect on a human level. And again, it makes it so much more engaging, so much more of a conversation than that dreaded word interrogation. Now, these are typically best for when you're interviewing with a panel, or if it's a organization that's very focused on culture. Panels are typically a situation where they're looking for, okay, how's this person going to fit in with our team? Right? How is this person going to gel with the current group? So making sure that, we share stories that demonstrate the kind of values that team or that company really, subscribes to, can be a good piece of strategy there. Now, you might not always have access to that information. However, majority of companies will have some type of web page at some point, somewhere on the page where they talk about what their values are, their culture. Like, Amazon's the biggest culprit of this. You can find all their leadership principles on their careers page. It's like bias for action, servant leadership, natural curiosity. You can kind of bake those things in there. They tend to listen. The other approach you can take, and this is usually best for very structured, formal interviews, interviewing with senior level people, stuff like that, is to share your professional value statement. This is also called your elevator pitch. There are many, many different words for it, or phrases for it, or names for it, however you want to put it. So we start off by talking about what is our profession and background, just a brief 1-sentence kick, like, I might say I'm a very detailed, organized business operations manager with 15 plus years of success, driving revenue and building strong customer relationships. So who I am, what I do, what I bring to the table. Now, I'm kind of spitballing off the top of my head here. So I would look to make that a tiny bit more conversational, but we want it to be one sentence to the point. Who I am, what do, what do I deliver? What are the outcomes I produce? Second one's going to be what creates value, right? What are your strengths? How do you put those strengths into play to deliver something we need? I might say, you know, I'm a very people focused, patient communicator. I know how to build relationships with people across cultures, across time zones, and find ways to align stakeholders with competing goals, right? So we can talk a little bit about how we put soft skills into play, whether that's your emotional intelligence, whether that's your analytical mindset, whether that's just that competitive drive you have, and talk about the evidence that proves what you've just said, because anybody can say they've got emotional intelligence or whatever else, but it's another thing to say, this is what I have, this is how I use it, here are the outcomes. So the evidence could be, hey, I got a shout out recently from our CEO at a town hall. Our project was global at scale. It came in well under budget. And my manager said it was the most valuable contribution from the department that year. We can talk about quantifiable data if we want in there, but we don't have to at the same time. The key is to show impact. That's what is almost always missing when somebody's struggling in an interview and they keep getting to that final round, or, you know, past the gatekeeper or after the second round, whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is, you're usually missing an opportunity to share value. And that's why this is so important. And then the last part of that elevator pitch is what excites you about the work. This is your opportunity to talk about what you want, which is a very rare thing when it comes to the hiring process. So I might say, you know, I'm looking for opportunities to expand my work on a global scale, deal with much more senior level stakeholders, continue to advance. And I see this opportunity as a great place to make all that happen. Always in on that positive note, nice high pitch, keeps it engaging, keeps it flowing. And look, you might have multiple stories in your back pocket, depending on the people that you're interviewing with. That doesn't mean you have to have a brand new one every time you go for an interview. But if you find yourself interviewing across the spectrum of small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses, enterprise, those might take a different approach. For much smaller organizations, it's going to be very people-focused, right? Very down to earth. Whereas at the enterprise level, I might be extremely structured. I might be buttoned up to the 9s and 10s. The point is that we have to be flexible with our approach. There is no one size fits all. Very rarely are there absolutes in this thing. So anytime you see somebody talking about resumes or LinkedIn or interviews or job search in general, and they say, you must do this or this has to have that, I always say take it with a grain of salt. Every situation's different. There are so many variables at play related to location, the role, the sector, where that person lives, so many different things. So having a flexible approach typically works the best. So one of the things that we really look to help people with through Nari's platform is addressing gaps. Right? Somebody who's been out of the workforce for a little while, how do we fill that gap and focus on value? And on the CV, the resume, we look to get ahead of it, right? We typically list out any time where we needed to take time away, whether that be for looking after a family member who was sick, or maybe you needed to take, you know, time off to travel, whatever, right? Companies often don't care about what was going on with the gap. They just want to know what was happening. And if we don't address it, we don't get out ahead of it, oftentimes it can, they fill it with the imagination, so to speak, and that can go your way. It might not go your way. So we want to get ahead of it. Now, when it comes to the interview, right, we want to spend as little time on it as possible. because there's only going to be so much value we can derive from a career gap. So we want to speak plainly about it, be direct. We don't want to be defensive or try to hide it. We want to talk about what we were doing. Were you a caregiver? Were you upskilling and learning new things? Maybe you did some volunteer work, you built a new house, things like that, right? Where I might be able to pull a few accomplishments or a few soft skills that, again, demonstrate value. And then we always want to pivot back to, I'm happy to be here now. I've taken time off. I'm refreshed. I'm energized. I'm really excited to be talking to you today. So kind of the bang standard example, it's the one that you'll see on the slide. It's, for somebody who maybe took time off to, have or raise children, it might say, I stepped back for a couple of years to take care of my kids. In that time, I actually ran the PTA budget and rebuilt our home finances from scratch. And I'm ready to bring that same kind of rigor and approach back into a team. So again, we address it, but we don't linger on it. We set it and forget it. We move on, right? Because at the end of the day, this is typically a tick box question, right? It's not something that will necessarily make or break you, but it is something that they're probably going to cover. And for me, the simplest answer is typically the most effective. If you find yourself apologizing or over explaining a gap, that's a negative, right? That's telling everyone in the room that that gap's a problem. And additionally, we need to reassure them on intent, right? The question's usually going to come, as I said, out of curiosity, right? They're just following what HR told them to do. It's not a trap, right? And when it feels like a trap, that's when you become defensive. And when you become defensive, that's when the interview is really going to start to go off the rails. Probably the longest gap one of my clients has had was 8 years. And we had to really work to find the best way to explain that. And I won't get into like private detail stuff like that, but the point is, most people's gaps are going to be a year, 2 years. And look, if it's a US based client I'm working with, it's usually got to be 9 to 12 months for me to start getting nervous about, okay, we've got to address this. For most places in Europe, the UK, a year and a half, usually after a year, I'm still going to, look to address it there. But it's much more, those markets tend to be much more forgiving. And then I once did a project where several people were relocating from Hong Kong to London, and they were nervous that they had a 2-week gap in their career history. So a lot of it depends on where you're located, but as I mentioned, the simplest answer is always the best. Address it, move on, drive back to value. So there's many different techniques for answering an interview question. Most people are pretty familiar with STAR, right? That's the most tried and true, trusted approach: situation, task, action, result. I also like to throw in a little bit of a tie-in there, and that tie-in can be the real differentiator, because it's one thing to tell a story, but sometimes people need you to hit them over the head with a hammer with it, so to speak. And that comes from saying, hey, this was the big problem we had at work. This is what I did. This is why we did it. This is the outcome we delivered. And this is how I would do the same thing in this role here. It's usually best for very clean, results-driven stories. Still looking to come in around that 90-second to 2-minute mark. And the thing I tell people is, look, if you think about an interview from an economic standpoint, a 90-second response, that'll cost you $1, cost you £1. If you go over 2-3 minutes, that costs you $1 million. We have to be economical when we go long. There's going to be certain stories and situations where you're going to need to flesh it out, or there might be several outcomes that you want to hit. Fantastic. You almost have to earn the right to get there through the stories that you tell, through making it conversational. That person needs to be engaged first, interested, curious. Then we can hit them with a bit of a longer one. But until then, we want to try to keep it not necessarily punchy, but have a bit of brevity behind it. Right? Shakespeare said, "Brevity is the soul of wit." Don't waste my time. Get to the point. Um, Now, there are other ways of approaching an interview question, and one of my favorites is CARL. CARL stands for context, action, result, learning. So we follow some of the similar things of STAR. Hey, what's the problem? What'd you do? What's the outcome? What did you learn from that experience, and how did you apply that into future planning, process, projects, whatever? Because what we're doing is we're showing instead of telling, right? If I tell you I'm competitive, I'm adaptable, I'm somebody who works well within a team, maybe you believe me, maybe you don't. But if I show you through the stories I tell, whether that be a sports background, whether that be driving a big enterprise project over the finish line that had multiple stakeholders, blah, 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 that person's likely to get there on their own, right? It's the same thing with like kids. If I tell my daughter to do something, she probably won't do it. But if I ask her questions, use a bit of guided discovery, get her there on her own, she's much more likely to buy into that idea and then do it. The same thing is going to apply when it comes to interviews. So when you're using CARL and you're demonstrating that, hey, I'm somebody who's always learning, growing, trying to improve, hopefully that's going to be conveyed to the person you're speaking to, where they're going to say, hey, every story this person's told, he's telling me he's taking this and pushing that forward and keeps getting better. That's a continuous improvement mindset. That's what we need at this company. That's what we're trying to get to with it. And things to remember, last bit on this as well. Most people spend a majority of their time on the situation and task or the context and action. The result is what's key. Don't bury that at the end with just a couple words. Hammer home the impact. How did that impact the team in general? How did it impact the overall business? How did that impact the customer you were working with? How did that impact the strategic partner that you worked with? There's many different approaches that you can take, but so often when I do interview prep with people, they feel like they have to provide all the context in the world, and then I get almost zilch when it comes to an outcome and achievement. That's the moneymaker, right? And it, unfortunately, it usually has to come at the end of the story. I mean, sometimes you can find ways to fit in an achievement or the outcome at first, like, hey, we're actually able to generate X amount of revenue. Here's how we did it. But not every story is going to be conducive to that. So again, really look to kind of divvy up that time where the action, the results, that's going to be a probably 50% situation and task. If we can get it lower than 50, I'm over the moon. So now we're going to talk about preparing for the interview. And look, there are no shortage of tools to make this as streamlined as possible nowadays, whether that be through AI, whether that be just through things like Glassdoor. Even Reddit is a great way to get information. You're going to get a lot of angry, upset people, but at the same time, you're going to find some real actionable information there. So obviously, we want to make sure we have a clear idea of products, services, customers, right? What is this company's mission? What's behind it? What drives them? Having an idea about the size of the company, where they're located, how they're growing as well, can give you really good information about, okay, is this a company that is going to be growing over the next few years? They're just trying to remain steady, ride the wave. Are they in a big period of change and transformation? All these things can impact the stories that you tell and obviously the decisions that you might make. If you are somebody who enjoys that kind of growth-minded, breakneck startup kind of speed, then yeah, tech companies, scale-ups, by all means. But if you're looking for something that's a bit more laid back, that's a bit more some of the less sexier industries, companies, things like that, That again, it's going to influence the stories that you tell. It's going to influence what you're looking for in this next role. Having an idea as well of, you know, I mean, it's easy to talk about culture for a lot of companies because you would say, oh, what's the culture like here? And they might say, oh, it's great. It's wonderful. We do lunch on Fridays. We have offsites, blah, blah, blah. And I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here, but when it comes to finding out about a company's culture and their values, what I might say is, you know, when it's your turn to ask questions, ask them a situational question. Maybe something like, okay, tell me about a time where you had an employee who had to take a lot of time off, maybe due to a family member who was sick, maybe they had a bereavement. How did you support that individual while still making sure the team performed the work at its highest level? They can't give you a story or something concrete. That's a red flag for me. All right. Life happens. Everybody knows that. So I want to know, how does the group circle the wagons? How do we look after ourselves? This is how you can get a real feel for a company's values and what the culture is going to be like there. Obvious places to go look to do your research. I mean, look, especially too, if you're using Claude, ChatGPT, or whatever, you can find out so much about a company. I would prompt it to search things like, you know, annual reports, what's the stock price if it's a publicly traded company, things like that. I'm a big fan of Glassdoor. You know, usually get some really good insights there. And as I said as well, Reddit can be a pretty good place to find little insights about specific companies. Do treat individual reviews with caution, because usually, you know, people don't spend a lot of time writing nice things on Glassdoor. It's usually the opposite way. So, you know, and one last thing as well, as you do this research, sometimes you can find opportunities to read the tone of how they describe things and then mirror that language the company uses about itself. I think it's the Ritz-Carlton, when they refer to customers, they refer to it, I think, as like our ladies and gentlemen, right? You know, at Disney, I believe it was any employee there is a cast member. Going back to what I said about Amazon's leadership principles being on their career page, you know, they look for people that have a bias for action, who are servant leaders, who are naturally curious. We don't want to necessarily shoehorn in there, but if you can find ways to talk about those things organically through the conversation, it just shows that, hey, you not only did your homework, but your values and what you're looking for, or what you bring to the table rather, align with what that company's trying to accomplish. So we'll talk about types of interviews with one quick caveat. Because I get asked this all the time, well, how many interviews should I expect? And again, it depends. If I had to average it out, it's usually 4 to 5 rounds of interviews. You're typically going to start with a phone screener with a recruiter. This is mostly just ticking boxes. They're going to ask you some general questions about yourself, what you know about the role, a little bit about your background, just making sure you are who you say you are. The approach doesn't change. We still make it conversational. We still keep it engaging. From there, you're probably looking at a interview with a hiring manager, HR, something like that. It's going to be a bit more structured. Now we're getting into the game. From there, you're looking at a panel interview. So seeing how you fit in with the team. Is this a good culture fit? Things like that. I've had some people do panel interviews with 2 people. I had one gentleman who's a client the other day, had to go to coffee with 6 people for his panel interview. So they didn't even do it in the office. They went out for, you know, coffee and scones or whatever, and I guess just drilled them with questions or just made it conversational. Apparently it went well, so more power to them. But the point is, you kind of have to expect anything, because that final round is usually going to be with the person who signs off on you as an employee. Hiring manager might be there, somebody from HR, just depends on the level you're at. Now, with that said, I've recently had a client who went through 2 interviews and was in the job. Took about 3 weeks. One poor lady had to go through 14 rounds of interviews, if I remember correctly, over the course of like 7, 8, 9 months. And she still didn't get it. Got to the final round. Now, she ended up with one of that company's competitors, so it worked out at the end of the day. But the point is, there's not always rhyme and reason behind this stuff. I mean, again, I work with people who will go to a final round interview, hear nothing back, ask for follow-up, ask for feedback, hear nothing back, pretty much abandon ship on that opportunity. But then a couple months later, that company reach out and says, hey, we've got an offer for you. This can come from a variety of different reasons, because people often come to me and they say, well, I interview for these roles and then I don't hear anything. I don't hear any feedback. There might not be anything to tell, right? A company might be going through a restructure at that time. We might be getting close to a fiscal year ending and they need to see if we have budget next month for that role. So what we're looking to do is, I shouldn't say what we're looking to do, what we kind of have to do at certain points is to have patience, for lack of a better word, because we never typically know what's going on at the other end of that company. We can only control what we control, right? And that is going to come down to being conversational, being polite, being punctual, being professional. Now, when it comes to, things like video interviews, things like that, there's some best practices I always like to share. And again, there's no right or wrong to this. There's just different approaches people take. But for me, we want to try to be as engaging as we can. So I want to have plenty of light on my face, make sure it's easy to see my facial expressions, to see the engagement. Typically what we want to do is make sure we also frame ourselves correctly within the camera. So I'm not like leaning off to the side. I'm right here. I'm engaging with you. You always want to test your tech beforehand. So I tell people, restart your computer 5 minutes before the interview starts. You don't want to have to be dealing with bandwidth issues, stuff like that. Kick all the family off the internet. So I don't want anybody streaming or gaming or stuff like that. On top of that as well, make sure our microphone's working correctly, sounds good. To do that, it's as simple as just, open up another Google Meet on your phone, connect it with the computer, make sure you can hear everything nice and clear. Again, you don't want to have to be worrying about this stuff when you're already nervous and you've got some butterflies in the chest, stuff like that. If it's a video interview, when it comes to things like background, I mean, like, look, I like having stuff in my background. I don't blur it out because sometimes it's conversation starters. People ask about the scars behind me or my fish or whatever else, right? The point is we can use that to, again, make it conversational, make it engaging. Not something you have to do, something you can do. Now, I talked a little bit about this before, but I'm going to hammer it home again just because when it comes to delivery, this is usually the biggest challenge. Because think about it. We get nervous. We don't want to sound dumb. We want to make sure we sound like we know what we're talking about. So as soon as that question leaves the interviewer's mouth, I'm going to respond. Take a second. Let your brain catch up with your mouth. You do not seem dumb or unintelligent if you take a pause before responding. Silence, thoughtfulness, these are common things in a regular conversation. When we think about what we say before we say it. Right now, some people have the gift of the gab. They can just go, and more power to them. Majority of people need to bake in a few pauses because I might need to go in a different direction than where I started in. And if I never stop talking, I'm trying to do so many things at once, it usually just ends up in a crash. But again, take a pause, deep breath, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and then I go into it. That answer is typically going to be much better, much more engaging, much more structured. And make sure as well, whether you're doing a video interview or you're in person, I'm using my hands to emote. I'm using my facial expressions to match that as well. that body language I talked about in that first, minute of that interview starting. If you come into the room and your shoulders are up and your arms are crossed and you look very nervous or defensive, like you're protecting your neck, that's not putting off the right tone. And on the flip side of that, I'm not walking in with my chest out thinking, oh, look how awesome I am. We find the middle. So I'm standing up, chins up. I engage with everybody in the room, use their name. People love hearing their name. So when you get it, use it and repeat it, right? Especially if it's a panel, make sure you're engaging with everyone there. If you're just focusing on one person the whole time, these people might feel left out. They're not going to like you as much. Again, this is not something you learn overnight. This is something that takes practice. So one of the things I tell people who haven't interviewed in a long time is, look, you might get an opportunity to interview for a job where you're like, it's like 50-50. I could take it or leave it. Still worth going. And here's the thing. You might say, oh, well, I don't want to waste this company's time. Look, you don't know what you don't know. You might walk into that interview and it's a completely different type of job. Or maybe they start to interview you for that job and they say, hey, you're actually suited for a better one that pays more. So we never know where the possibilities are going to take us, right? You might have a way of providing value that they haven't even figured out yet. So it's worth your time to go. And on top of that, you get solid practice. As somebody who prepares people for interviews for a living, I can spend a month coaching somebody, practicing, doing all the techniques and going through the theory. No substitute for having your butt in the hot seat, having to answer questions with a stranger. And that's what we need, opportunities to do that. Mock interviews are great, using things like Claude or Chat to practice interview responses. Yeah, good. You need to do it with a person. And you need to do it where there's some stakes, because that's the key. If there's no stakes, there's no nerves. And if there's no nerves, that's not going to translate to how you're going to be feeling in that moment. We have to get used to them being there so that we can then deal with it. But if we keep putting ourselves in situations and environments where there are no stakes and I'm not nervous, a lot of these things start to fall off when your pulse quickens and you're breathing a little bit faster and you're trying to think fast and speak even faster. So when it comes to types of questions that you're typically going to come across, some of the most common are behavioral or situational questions. So behavioral is usually going to be looking backwards, right? So they might be, tell me about a time where you had to deal with a challenging customer. The problem that people often fall into when it comes to responses to these types of questions is they focus on the theory. This is what I would do, or this is what I have done. When in fact, you're not communicating anything useful, right? You're just telling them how you do the job. What they're looking for is, how did you do the job, but how did you do it? Not just, okay, what are the actions? What are the outcomes? What are the challenges that you had to overcome? When it comes to situational, this is where we're looking forward. How would you handle a challenging customer? And we still want to lead with the real example. Showing how you've handled something unfamiliar sometimes can cover a gap. So for example, if they might be, well, tell me about a time where you had to deal with a challenging customer. Maybe you've never been customer facing. So instead, maybe you deal with strategic partners. You have different stakeholders, and that stakeholder was pissed at you. How did you repair that relationship? And then what was the outcome from that? Did we get our project back on track? Were we all aligned now with our main goals? Whatever. We can find ways to bridge any perceived gap there. And one quick follow-up to it as well is, like, especially when it's a situational question, when you do share the story, you might then come back. And again, this is about having questions in your back pocket. How would your team handle that situation? So now you can start to see in real time, how does it align with your response? And you might need to adjust. You might say, hey, I am spot on, feeling good. It's going to drop those nerves a bit, be more engaging, more conversational. Historical questions. I mean, sometimes you will get people that want to go through the resume from your first job to your current job. There's going to be questions about maybe, you know, why did you leave this role? Again, same as dealing with a gap. State the reason plainly, right? Then we pivot to why this role, why right now. Some questions that come up during historical is, you know, and again, it ties into the other part of it is like, you know, strength questions, stuff like that is what's your greatest weakness or what's your greatest failure? And oftentimes people just focus on the negative thing, the part that they failed at. What I challenge people to do is a little two-step pivot. So you define the failure, you define the problem, but then you tell me what you did to fix that and then what the outcome was. So if I was using myself as an example, I'd say, well, my greatest weakness is I feel like I'm Superman. I can put the world on my shoulders. I don't need to ask for help. There's more than 24 hours in a day. That's not realistic. So here's what I've done to fix it. I've done X, I've done Y, I've done Z. Since then, my customer service scores have gone through the roof. I am generating more revenue and my team is much more engaged, much happier, much more productive. So I'm not even talking about the negative thing anymore. I'm talking about how I'm making money, saving money, building better teams. That little step away from a negative and back to value can be critical to avoiding a potential pitfall in an interview. Now, everybody's favorite part is when it comes to the salary. So for me, the way I like to approach it is we don't just set a number and then leave it. We want to frame it as I am currently interviewing for roles that pay between X and Y. X is going to be maybe 5% above what your rock bottom is, right? Top of the number, that Y, maybe that's 15, 20% higher than you make right now. We want to try to find what's good, what's better, what's amazing. And the reason we frame it as I'm currently interviewing for roles that pay between X and Y is that we're trying to generate demand. We're trying to demonstrate that you are someone who is talking to many suitors in town, that company is not the only one you're talking to. Very, very important. Because especially when we're dealing with a flooded market as we are now, having that little bit of demand can go a long way towards that company saying, hey, we got to sign this person now. We got to get on this. When it comes to negotiation side of things, there's always a song and dance, and people get nervous about, you know, oh, is this company going to be upset with me or da-da-da? Look, the company is always going to do what's best for the company. You have to do what's best for you and your family. So we have to be comfortable being a jerk sometimes, not necessarily being a jerk, but holding a line. This is my value. This is what I deliver. This is how I'm going to make your company money, or whatever their mission is or what they're trying to accomplish. Now, there's ways to make yourself whole if the base salary isn't where it needs to be. It could be bonuses. It could be money for transportation, home office budget, gym membership, extra maternity, paternity leave, extra vacation time, stuff like that. There's a lot of opportunities there to find ways to close that ground if we're still off on numbers. Basic rule for that is anything a company can write off on their taxes, it's probably fair game. Other things as well would be like professional training budget, things like that, or they're going to pay for you to go to a big conference, things like that. So challenging questions you're likely to come across. You know, the degree one, it doesn't happen as often as you think. But usually for the folks I work with, it's, you know, they've got enough achievements where it doesn't matter if a degree's there. We always go back to value. Well, it's like, well, yeah, I don't necessarily have a PhD, but I have been able to accomplish X, Y, Z, deliver these accomplishments with just my little old master's degree or something like that. You can add a little bit of humor to it. And the overqualified question often rears its head. I get some people who've been in leadership roles for a long time and then decide, oh, I think I'd be better fit in an individual contributor role. So we talk about what we enjoy about the job, maybe what we were missing in that leadership position, and talk about how not just our skills match with what that role is looking for, but how the accomplishments that you have delivered throughout your career, whether that's you personally or your team has done it, are going to align with what that job wants. So questions for you to ask. The number one I always train people on is, if you were going to hire me today, what is the first question? Or I'm sorry, what is the first problem you would have me solve? Or if you were going to hire me today, what's the first project you'd cut me loose on? Because what I'm looking to do is a bit of social engineering. I want that person thinking of me as the person doing the job, right? Not just another candidate who they're going to interview, the guy doing the job. You have to visualize me doing it, see me solving these problems. And they might say, well, we've had this stalled digital transformation project. It's been a big pain in our side. We'd cut you loose on that. You could then come back and say, hey, I've actually done several of those, haven't even told you about one of them. Let me walk you through it. It's just another opportunity to pile on more value, more accomplishments. Questions you want to ask as well. Is this role being backfilled, or is this a newly created role? If it's being backfilled, hey, am I walking into a potential sticky situation? Or if it's a brand new role, I'm going to be walking into a lot of ambiguity if we're still figuring out what this role is. Good information for you to have when you make the decision about whether we're going to take this role or not. And then, how do you all measure success here? Just so you've got an idea, again, of what you're walking into. What are your KPIs? What are your expectations? Ensuring that you're comfortable with those early on. And then very last thing before I shut up for a few questions here, the core I'm trying to get to with all of this, and I've said it before and I'll say it one last time, we have to make these feel conversational. We have to be authentic, right? There's kind of an AI arms race right now between candidates and between companies. Companies are using AI to screen people, to conduct interviews, stuff like that. And then candidates are trying to use AI to get past the screening or get past the bots. I even heard of a story of a gentleman who told the person he was interviewing with, he was the candidate, hey, there's going to be a 3-second lag. Sorry, my internet's down. And he had voice to chat on so that every time the person asked him a question, ChatGPT or whatever it was would pick it up and then give him a response. And then he would just read off of it like it was a script. I've even heard of stories of people doing that in like dating apps. Like they use ChatGPT to text and go back and forth with people, but then when they actually sit down for the date in person, it's a nightmare. Authenticity is what's working right now, whether that is how I help people word their resumes, whether that's what we position on LinkedIn, or how we deliver our interview stories. So whether that's being enthusiastic, whether that's asking questions, whether that's being positive, whether that's building a connection with that person, we can accomplish these things by being authentic. Cool. So that about covers it for me. Yeah, and I see Flora had a comment. Unfortunately, it's very common. I have asked, how do you set your team up for success? And the interviewer got offended. I mean, we're always dealing with people at the end of the day, and people can be finicky. People can have weird feelings about certain questions, things like that. But I think as far as, asking how does you set up the team for success, that's a very fair question, because you want to know, okay, how does leadership look after people on the team? How do we build a culture and an environment that allows people to be successful? And if they can't give you a response, rightfully so, that is a big, big red flag. And then one more here. I have people asked, I just really need a job to support my family. I don't really care what I'm walking into. Doing this every interview is draining. I mean, look, if it comes down to, hey, I need a job to support my family, I just need to take something, we do what it takes as providers in the household. There might be certain opportunities where, yeah, you don't need to interview, the military. There's going to be certain aspects of it, but it's not going to be nothing like this type of job interview that you would find in corporate worlds or government, things like that. So the best practices are there. It's just up to you whether or not you want to use them. And I can tell you, somebody's been doing this for a long time and has happily built a business on the back of it. It works. You just have to find the right way for you to deliver it. Great. So that's all the time I have for today. So appreciate everybody joining. Again, if you have any questions, if you catch the recording of this and you want to ask a few, feel free to ping me a message on LinkedIn. Same thing. If you would like to talk in person, jump on to Nari. You can get a free trial for 7 days. Come check out the platform. Come ask a career coach any questions you have, whether they be interviews, resumes, LinkedIn, and we'll get you sorted. Otherwise, I appreciate